If you have a look at the face value of Australian debt as a percentage of GDP, right up until 2007, it was falling.
We should stand with those who are linked up with us.
You don't have to agree with my thesis, but your health response is so bad that now people are dying in droves well after the pandemic.
The process is the punishment. I'm sure you've heard the expression, the process is the punishment. When you understand how true that is, but also understand exactly how it works and how processes are being weaponized against you, then you'll understand why people like me, libertarians, believe the only lasting solution is to massively strip the government of power to let people make decisions for themselves. Why? Because at the moment we need permission to do just about anything in life. And the process of obtaining government permission to do something is inevitably used for the punishment of those that the government or bureaucrats don't like. The latest example happened just yesterday. Here at the Aussie Wire, we've sponsored and been looking forward to the Donald Trump Jr. speaking tour that was supposed to happen this weekend. It's been postponed. If you haven't heard the news already, then I'm sorry to have to inform you. But the reason why it's been postponed and exactly how it went down is instructive. Turning Point Australia, the promoters of the Donald Trump Jr. tour, say they applied for his visa in May. There's a 21-day limit on how long the government has to come back with a decision, yes or no. That means at the latest, the answer was required to have been given well before the end of June. But that didn't happen. And as days of silence stretched into weeks, the silence became deafening. Finally, with the tour just days away, Donald Trump Jr. due to board a plane in less than 24 hours with no visa in hand, the promoters had to break the news that the tour was being postponed. They had no real choice. This, of course, has huge financial implications for everyone involved, not to mention the inconvenience for the thousands of Australians who bought tickets and made travel and accommodation and babysitting plans, etc. But it's what happened next that really tells the story. Within hours of the news breaking that the tour was postponed, the visa was issued. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? A month and a half of silence, weeks past the deadline. The silence is suddenly and conveniently broken within hours of the tour being postponed. It's almost like they were waiting for something, waiting for the tour to be postponed. And of course, when media reached out to the Home Affairs Minister, they got a response that said, and I quote, "It's his choice whether he comes or not, but there is no immigration impediment to him coming." In other words, don't look at us, we issued the visa. It's almost cute, isn't it? The way they do this stuff, thinking that no one will call them out. It's like a schoolchild showing up with a handwritten doctor's certificate, telling the teacher, I'm not allowed to do PE, the doctor said. Like everyone can see that's a fraud. They didn't want Donald Trump Jr. coming to Australia, but they couldn't handle the heat of denying him a visa, so they just slow-played it, broke their own rules about timeliness, and simply waited and waited and waited until the process itself became the punishment. Immediately after the tour was postponed, they issued the visa so they could get that cute little soundbite out to their friends at the Sydney Morning Herald. There is no immigration impediment, says the spokesperson for the Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, somehow keeping a straight face. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill. Why is that name familiar? Oh, that's right. She's a World Economic Forum alumni, part of the Forum of Young Global Leaders. The head of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, brags that, well, don't take my word for it. Hear it from him.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
We penetrate the cabinets. Why? Why do they penetrate the cabinets? What's the value in that? Well, It means that it's the World Economic Forum young leaders who control the processes, which means they dish out the punishments. Another example. Right now, Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit Party and a man hated by the elites more passionately than anyone else, except perhaps Donald Trump and his son, can't get a bank account. How can that be? For a grown adult with a good business and financial history who's been with his bank for 40 years to suddenly have his accounts closed and be denied an account with every other bank that he applies to. Well, it's all about risk, you see. Nothing nefarious going on, nothing to see here. You see, the UK government has introduced legislation requiring banks to treat politically exposed persons differently. And there's quite a process to comply with that, and it imposes quite a cost on the bank, and as a result, Mr. Farage, I'm afraid you're going to have to take your business elsewhere. It's nothing personal, Mr. Farage. We're just following the process. And yet somehow that process doesn't seem to be applied to all of the other politically exposed persons like, I don't know, the British Prime Minister, every member of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. It's almost as if the process is being selectively applied. That can't be right. The process is the punishment, and that's why people like Klaus Schwab have invested so much time and energy training young, impressionable, ambitious people, filling their minds with neo-fascist ideas of controlling the world and carrying out his great reset, and placing those people into positions where they control the process. Another example. We're now past halfway through 2023, and I'm still being criminally prosecuted for my role in supporting the anti-lockdown and anti-mandate protests in Victoria 2 years ago. The fact that the jabs are now known to cause serious side effects in some people, the fact that we now have unexplained excess deaths at levels never seen in modern history, the fact that research has now shown clearly that lockdowns did not save lives overall, the fact that Sweden, who did not lock down, has the lowest per capita mortality rate in Europe, and the state of Victoria, which did lock down, the harshest out of all of Australia, has the highest per capita death rate in all of Australia, none of that matters. A process has no room for fact, data, truth. Doesn't matter that I was right. It's just the process. It's nothing personal. I'm just doing my job. We'll just go through the process. Let the process do its thing. The process is the punishment. Even if Nigel Farage is able to get a bank account again, the process he's been put through is the punishment. Even though Donald Trump Jr. will be coming to Australia soon, the tour has been postponed, not cancelled, by the way. Even though he will come, and I suspect the federal government will not be willing to play the same game again, I suspect that the second time around they will issue that visa without delay, because all eyes will be on them. But even so, the promoter and all the ticket holders have still been punished by this abuse of process. Even if the charges against me are eventually dropped or dismissed by a judge, they've still exacted punishment by dragging me through an expensive 2-year process. So what do we do about it? There's 2 things I want to highlight immediately. 2 things that we can all help with. Firstly, we need to make being associated with the World Economic Forum, with the Young Global Leaders Forum, completely toxic, a career ender for anyone who has that on their resume. The World Economic Forum, make no mistake and hear me well, the World Economic Forum is the rise of a new fascism. This is attractive to people who wish to merge the power of the state with the power of corporations and control and reshape the world into their own Great Reset image. That's not some madcap conspiracy theory. There's literally a book about it, and that book, titled The Great Reset, was written by Klaus Schwab himself, where he talks about what it is that he wants to do. You can buy the book and read it. Right now, young members of the Global Leaders Forum treat their membership like a badge of honor. They're proud of it. We need to change that and make it a mark of shame, something to hide, something that's toxic to your career, like having a secret past in the KKK or the Hitler Youth. Being trained by Klaus Schwab in his dystopian and totalitarian Great Reset should instantly disqualify you from any taxpayer-funded position. Taxpayer-funded positions are for the purpose of serving taxpayers, not pursuing some external agenda dreamed up by the son of Nazis who never quite got over the fact that they lost the war. That's the first thing. And we can all do that. Let's call out the World Economic Forum and make being associated with them absolutely toxic to any politician's career. The second, and where we need to get busy, is that we need to play the game and start taking those positions for ourselves. My goal as a libertarian is to see the government stripped of its power, to the point that it really doesn't matter who gets elected. There's just not much they can do to screw up our lives. But right now, the government has near total power. Between federal, state and local governments, there's very little we can do without begging for permission, without going through some process and being punished. And if Klaus Schwab is willing to go to all that effort to get his minions in charge of those processes, then I think it's worth our while to take those positions off him. But how can we do that? We're talking about federal ministers and parliamentarians, aren't we? Not so fast. In actual fact, the World Economic Forum has invested a great deal of energy infiltrating local governments. Your local councillors and their bureaucrats have been targeted directly and enticed to sign up to various programs that always seem to involve more surveillance, more control, more cameras, less personal independence and freedom. The most famous of these programs, of course, is the gradual rollout of 15-minute cities. It's a nice-sounding program which, in the first instance, is supposed to ensure that everything you need is within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from where you live. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? But they don't tell you about the second part until later, that they're going to gradually restrict your movement so that you have to stay within 15 minutes. And if you want to leave your area, then, well, you'll have to get permission. You'll have to go through the process. See how this works? There's a funny saying about libertarians, that we want to take over the government and use it to leave everyone alone. It's funny because it's true. And in a world where the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab are deliberately training up minions to take over the government, seize control of the processes, and dole out the punishments in pursuit of the Great Reset, us libertarians might have to get our hands dirty and do just that, take over the government and use it to leave everyone alone. Take control of the processes and then ensure that they're never used as a punishment, not for the people that you like, nor for the people that you don't like. It's not appropriate for processes to be used as punishments, ever. We take those positions of power and then we do everything in our power to destroy that power. Yep, you know what? I don't like the idea either. I don't want to be spending my time getting busy with politics at any level. Contrary to popular belief, and contrary to the last 15 years of work that I've done, I would much rather be talking about pretty much anything other than politics. But as has been said throughout history, the price of good people paying no attention to politics is that you end up being ruled by lesser people. The price of not stepping up to do it ourselves is that we end up being ruled by World Economic Forum young leaders. And that's a punishment that none of us should be willing to bear. It's time to get uncomfortable. It's time to get busy. It's time to use the process to punish those that seek to control us. Now, here's the news. Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the Friedman Conference in Sydney every year is one of my favourite don't miss it type events, but then I'm kind of weird like that. I enjoy a good political talk fest, probably more than is entirely healthy. But one of the great things about it is that every year it brings over fascinating guests from around the world, and this year it's brought Spike Cohen. And Spike is a fascinating guy and a funny guy. If you go to his Twitter, you'll find out that he is the vice presidential bronze medalist, which, if you think about it, it's coming third in a two-horse race is kind of difficult. But Spike joins me now. Spike, how are you? Welcome to Australia.
I'm doing fantastic, man, and I appreciate being on. I have not actually gotten my medal in the mail yet, but as soon as I do, I will update everyone with a good profile picture of the actual medal around my neck. So.
Well, Spike is actually in Australia, but there is a certain amount of lag here thanks to the NBN. So perhaps they're sending the signal back via the US and then back into Australia to chat with you now.
Through the States and back to Australia.
I think that's what's happening. Now, we just had the news break yesterday that Donald Trump Jr.'s visa for his speaking tour that's supposed to be happening this weekend, well, officially they're able to say now, oh no, we approved it, but they waited so long to approve it that it was a useless gesture by the time they did. The whole tour has been postponed. I want to know, did you have any trouble coming through, and did you have any concerns coming through that you might have some trouble?
Donald Trump Jr. forgot the first lesson is never use your real name. No, so I use my real name. I didn't have any trouble. It was kind of an automatic thing.
Yeah.
I filled it out and got the email. By the time I had finished filling it out, the email was already there, and I had the approvals like 12 seconds or something like that. I always wonder when I go to another country if and when my tweets are going to catch up with me. So far, so good.
Yeah.
But we shall see. I didn't have any trouble.
Now, you arrived only just recently into Australia. Were you in Washington, D.C. briefly at all before you came here? Because I don't know if you've seen the reports, but they may have found a bit of a mess that you left behind inside the White House. There was some white powder identified as cocaine. I just thought, Spike, you're a libertarian. Is there any relationship there?
No, and if they had found white powder I had left behind, it wouldn't have been cocaine. But no, it definitely was not me.
Okay. All right. Well, look, the argument is happening now as to whether it was Donald Trump Jr. or Hunter Biden. I'm saying it's neither of those two. It would have been someone working in the White House and probably pulling a double shift and needing a bit of a pep me up. Now, you're in Australia. You've come to Australia to speak at the Friedman Conference. I'm looking forward to that, by the way. I'll be there as well, and we'll put a link to in the description of this video on where you can find tickets, and we'll actually put a discount code as well, so you can get 20% off if you want to come along to the Friedman Conference this weekend in Sydney. But Spike, what motivates someone like you to travel halfway around the world to speak to people? What's the message that you're bringing, and what's so important about it that you would actually go to these sorts of lengths?
Well, it's actually twofold. Number one, I wanted to come and let Australians know that there are libertarians and liberty-minded and freedom-loving people around the world who stand with them against one of the most tyrannical regimes in the I guess the developed world. But it's also the mirror of that. I want people back in the States and around the world, or certainly at least around the Anglospheric world, who think that every single Australian is just buckling under this totalitarian COVID regime. Let them know that no, there's a very large remnant of people who are refusing to buckle and are refusing to comply, and are going to continue to fight until they win and until liberty is back in Australia where it belongs.
Well, I think it's a very important message to take back to America. I know that Americans can be very America-focused. It's one of the bugbears that the rest of the world has with America. Like, you have the World Series of Baseball. Who's in the World Series of Baseball? Well, New York and California, and there's Japan. That makes it the World Series, right? You've got Japan in there.
The whole world.
Come on, the entire planet. Like, there's America plus that place we conquered in World War II. Guys, wake up. There is an entire planet out there. But the fact is, there is some justification to that. I'm going to go into bat for my American friends here. There is some justification to that. America is an astonishing social experiment, a political experiment that began 250 odd years ago. Happy belated 4th of July, by the way, the insurrectionist, rebellious holiday that it is. So what is it that, in your opinion, makes America a different place? Do you believe it's a different place to start with? I do, but do you? And what's the cause of that, and what needs to be done to preserve that?
I do think that it is different than just about anywhere else on Earth. And I think the most positive thing that makes us different than everywhere else is that we were literally founded in an act of rebellion against tyranny. And I mean, we could sit here and dive down into all the things that happened after that. The fact that the original revolutionary government was itself replaced in an act of treason with the one that we have now, and many other factors. But the reality is, from the beginning, our people, the American people, refused tyranny and literally fought against it. It was treason. It was a mass act of treason against what at the time was the largest and greatest government in human history. The British Empire at that time, the sun never set on the British Empire. And the sheer gall that a bunch of agrarian backwoods people thought that they were going to not just be able to initially repel the British, but be able to keep them at bay and end up supplanting them as the largest or certainly the most prosperous country on earth. I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of chutzpah, and it also takes a tremendous amount of refusal to comply with the status quo. And it's very unfortunate and very sad to watch increasingly in America where a large plurality of the public is now going along with an increasingly totalitarian status quo, which is why I fight so strong for freedom in my country. But I agree with you. I think that very often Americans tend to forget that we're like 5% of the population. And if tyranny spreads everywhere else, it is an absolute fantasy and pipe dream to think that we can simply have a pocket of freedom here, even especially when we are increasingly less free in the States. But even if we were, that we could have a pocket of freedom here while everywhere else becomes more and more totalitarian, and that would never catch up with us. And obviously that doesn't mean we go and bomb and invade or liberate or anything like that. That achieves the opposite. We've seen that many times. But it does mean that we should stand with those who are linked up with us in the exact same fight for freedom in their country. So I was not only happy and honored to come here, I think that as a libertarian and as someone who wants to see every single human being on this planet free, that of course I would want to come here and stand side by side with my my fellow man here as we fight for freedom.
Well, look, it's wonderful to have you. I will say I tend to compare American history with the Fast and Furious movie franchise. The origin story is amazing, but boy, it's become an absolute basket case since then. It's just over the top, full of special effects and bravado. That's all it is now. And that to me kind of sums up the American story a little bit.
No, that's actually pretty accurate, yeah.
Look, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm looking forward to catching up with you in Sydney. What is your must-do activity? What is it that you as an American say, I'm going to Australia, I have to do this? What's on your list?
Well, I was going to try Vegemite, and then it turns out I have a very highly restrictive diet because of I have multiple sclerosis. So there's 15, 20 things I can't eat, and like 2 of them are in Vegemite, so I can't have it. So that's off the list. I honestly, I already did the thing I wanted to do. And I'll be doing it again tomorrow at the New South Wales Parliament. I went into the belly of the monarchist beast in the Victoria Parliament, and I spoke about freedom with Australian libertarians from across the country. And I'm about to do it again tomorrow at the New South Wales Parliament, and then I'm going to get to go to Freedom Fest and talk about freedom with some incredible freedom-loving Australians from all across the world, actually. So I'm pretty much, if I had an Australian bucket list, I'm checking it off one by one here.
You're checking it off as you go. Look, it's wonderful to have you here. That's all we've got time for here on the Aussie Wire. But Spike, I look forward to meeting you in person in Sydney this weekend at the Friedman Conference. If you want tickets, the link is in the video description along with a discount code as well. I hope to see you there, Spike. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. I can't wait to see you.
This weekend is the 2023 Friedman Conference. It's one of my favourite events of the year, and there are tickets still available. Follow the link in the description, and I'll see you there. Well, on Tuesday just past, the Reserve Bank of Australia chose not to raise interest rates. Now, this comes on the back of a record-breaking string, if my memory serves me correctly, of interest rate increases. And I wanted to understand, what does that mean? What's the change that they're seeing that would cause them to make that decision instead of continuing the path that they were already on? Of course, I have no idea, so I brought on someone who does. Professor Sinclair Davidson, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you for having me. Now,
you're a professor of economics, of institutional economics. I'm not even quite sure what that means, but I'm hoping you can shed some light. What's your read on this decision by the Reserve Bank of Australia not to raise interest rates on Tuesday? It was hotly contested. The pundits were split. Some thought they would, some thought they wouldn't. What's your take on why they didn't?
I actually think it's a combination of they're not quite sure what's happening. They seem to think that there may be some sort of plateau in pricing. If you think back to the week before, the ABS brought out data basically showing that inflation had moderated very slightly. It's still well above the 2 to 3% range. But nonetheless, there was an argument that perhaps they should just wait and see what's going to happen. And that's what they chose to do. I myself was very surprised. I actually think that interest rates should have gone up yesterday by about 25 basis points. I still think in the next 6 months, we're going to see them rise by another 0.5% or so.
Wow.
And I don't really see the value of sort of delaying that. Inflation is a vicious problem for any economy to have. And while the Reserve Bank are kind of trying to engineer what they call a soft landing, the The fact of the matter is that there are no soft landings. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. The economy does need to shrink. We've kind of known that for a couple of years. And so this is like pulling a plaster. There's no point in sort of dragging out the agony. You just get on with it. And I kind of think that first and foremost, they should be bringing inflation down to the 2 to 3% range.
So you mentioned inflation there. I want to pick on a trend that I've noticed, which I find particularly curious. Jim Chalmers, the current federal treasurer, when he was in opposition, used to talk a lot about this idea called stagflation. He mentioned this from time to time. It was some sort of a spectre, some sort of a very bad thing. I don't fully understand what it means. Now he is, of course, the treasurer, no longer in opposition, but the current opposition, the current shadow treasurer, has just recently been coming out and talking about stagflation. What is stagflation? Is this just some spectre used by those in opposition to try and criticise those in power? Or is this something that we should actually be concerned about?
Stagflation is a very real problem we should be worried about. In the standard macroeconomic approach brought in by Lord Keynes in the 1930s, which more or less people still think about in those terms, you can either have high levels of unemployment or you can have inflation, but you're not going to have both at the same time. And that was the standard view of economists right up until the 1970s, when the global economy simultaneously had high rates of inflation and high rates of unemployment, which was a theoretical impossibility at that time.
Right.
That got known as stagflation. We should be worried about it because an economy with stagflation is in a terrible bind, because the tools that you use to fight off inflation are also the tools that will be contributing to higher levels of unemployment.
Right.
So it's very difficult to actually treat each of these problems separately when you've got both at the same time. So this is actually a big problem economies can have. The last time we had these things was, as I say, in the 1970s, 1980s. It looked like we might have it after the global financial crisis of 10, 15 years ago. Central banks were very clever at warding off stagflation then, but it may well be that the vultures are coming home to roost. And so this is something we should be worried about, we should be thinking about. It is unsurprising that the Treasurer is not mentioning this word at all, because after all, it is his job to actually make sure that we don't have this problem. So obviously, he can't be talking down the economy. And the opposition, of course, it's their job to make sure that the government fails and lose their jobs and so on and so forth. So this is part of the cut and thrust of politics. It's unsurprising. It's exactly what I would expect. But at the same time, this is actually a real problem we should be concerned about. We are quite lucky at the moment in Australia. Unemployment is at about 3.5% or so, very unusually low. And this is actually a good thing. If you think about it, I remember 20 years ago, Kim Beazley, the leader of the opposition, was mocked and ridiculed when he said, we would like to have an unemployment rate with a 4 in front of it. And everybody said, oh, what an idiot. What does he know? Well, actually, unemployment at 3% or 3.5% is a nice situation to be in. But of course, bear in mind, this can change very rapidly. We were coming out of a very unusual policy experiment during the COVID years, where governments actually shut down the economy, try to put it into sort of a deep freeze, and then take it out again. That's never been attempted before. So everything that we are doing now is in uncharted waters. So we literally don't know what's going to happen next. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be troubling. But the recovery from the COVID pandemic policy choices are actually going to be very expensive over a long period of time.
I do have some concerns about those official unemployment figures. There are huge numbers of employees that were locked out of their jobs effectively because they refused to take the mRNA-based vaccines that were mandated for their industries. A number of those people, many that I know personally, are still not back in their jobs and not back in their industries. And I do wonder how the unemployment figures handle those people, whether they're captured or whether because they're officially not looking for work or whatever the caveat may be, whether they're simply not showing up. But I'm not sure. Sink, before I move on, is that something you can shed any light on? Are there numbers around any of that?
The numbers that I've been looking at are the hours worked.
Right.
Now, bearing in mind, this is a guesstimate, but the hours worked are quite high and are quite consistent with there being a low rate of unemployment in Australia.
Okay.
Now, bearing in mind, there is an official definition of what employed is, and and it's something like you've worked 1 hour in paid employment over a 2-week period. So there's a huge fudge factor in there. But nonetheless, it is a consistent and coherent definition that is more or less employed across multiple economies, and that number is showing that we have reasonably low unemployment in Australia, and the hours worked number is quite high as well. So, is it precisely the number? Probably not. Is that number a pretty good guess? Yes, it probably is.
All right. Well, thank you for shedding some light on that. I want to take a step back a little bit here before we finish. The prediction of the death of the unsecured dollar, the ungold-backed dollar, and this unsustainable debt levels has been going on for decades. We've had person after person put claim after claim about when the collapse was going to come. Once US debt hit 100% of US GDP, well, that was going to be it. It was the house of cards was going to fall over. And of course, we're well beyond that now. There are people who say we can just load up on debt forever. This is no problem. We can just keep this going. Modern monetary theory and people like that. What's your take on the situation? Why are we able to get into this much debt, well beyond many people's predictions? And is this something that is sustainable beyond this point? Where do you see this going in time?
So debt is an interesting thing because my personal view is that we are well beyond the level where it is sustainable. It is almost certainly unsustainable. What worries me is that we can keep loading up for a long time because a lot of our financial system and money itself is actually a shared delusion. Money has value because we all think it's got value, and debt is valuable because we all think we'll pay it back. And as long as we all keep thinking it's going to keep working, it probably will keep working. Now, a lot of things that human beings do work like this. The rule of law is another thing. We all think, because we've got impartial laws and what have you, that somehow we're not living under tyranny. So we as humans have these shared delusions, and these delusions work quite well for most of the time until they don't. And I was looking at Australian debt figures just yesterday, and I was looking at the face value of Australian government debt, comparing that to the tax take of the economy. And if you have a look at the tax take of the economy is kind of varied for the last 50 years or so, between 20 and 25% or so. If you have a look at the face value of Australian debt as a percentage of GDP, right up until 2007, it was falling. So my sort of rough and ready guesstimate there was, well, to the extent that the economy was growing, the tax take was fairly stable, government debt was falling as a percentage of GDP. If government was borrowing money, they were probably spending it more wisely than not. Now, I don't want to say that government spending is wise, but they weren't obviously wasting it.
Sure.
After 2007, there's this massive turning point, and it just rockets up. But nonetheless, the tax take of the economy, which is a pretty good measure of how well everybody else is going, what we're earning, because the government takes a percentage, this is all good. All of a sudden, there's this big change. And so it looks to me that after 2007, the Rudd government, and that includes nearly 10 years of coalition government.
Yes, indeed.
Over the period since 2007, we have not been spending government debt wisely. The money's actually gone into consumption. Now, I don't want to be overly controversial, but we do actually need government debts if you're going to be building roads and airports and train lines and things like this, because you don't have the money all the time. So it makes sense to borrow to do that. In the same way a household will borrow to build a house. That kind of makes sense. But borrowing to fund your consumption is probably a bad use of government debt. And that's what I feel has been happening for the last 15 years or so, since 2007. We've been borrowing to fund consumption, and that is unsustainable. So at some point, people will suddenly say, no, that's not happening anymore, and the value of our currency will decline, or our interest rates will rocket through the roof, unemployment will rise. All these terrible things that we talk about that can go wrong with an economy are more likely to go wrong when you've got high levels of government debt than when you've got low levels of government debt. So we're actually in a fragile place right now. We should be worried about where the economy is going and what is happening.
So when that shared delusion comes crumbling down, you're saying bad things are likely to happen.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
On that happy
note, bear in
note,
mind, the shared these shared delusions work well most of the time. But when they stop working,
it's like a lot of things. It works really well until it doesn't. Sinclair Davidson, thank you so much for your time. On that happy note, we're going to have to wind up this interview, but thank you for joining us here on the Aussie Wire. Well, most of you would be aware that we held an incredible conference in Perth where one of the speakers was none other than Ed Dowd. I introduced him there, and I've got him as a guest here on the Aussie Wire, not because of what he said in Perth, but because of this remarkable book, and actually my first book review or book interview on the Aussie Wire. Ed Dowd joins me now. Ed, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Topher. It's so good to be here. I enjoyed being in Australia.
Oh, look, we're a good place when we're not succumbing to tyranny. There's some issues that we need to overcome here, but once we overcome them, we'll go back to being one of the best places on earth. Look, your book, Cause Unknown, I knew about it before I met you. Once I met you, I thought, you know what, I really should get this guy's book. I found you to be a fascinating person to interact with in person, but also listening to you on stage. I got your book, and I'm so glad I did. Rather than me talking about it, why did you decide that you needed to write this book, and where does that title, Cause Unknown, come from?
So I became kind of a low-key celebrity in the freedom medical movement when I started pointing out all-cause mortality. We looked at some CDC data. We looked at some insurance data. And in the summer of 2022, Gavin DeBecker, who wrote my afterword, and Bobby Kennedy and Tony Lyons approached me, and they pitched the book. It was their idea to write a book on sudden deaths. And during that discussion, I said, look, I'm a data guy. The sudden deaths are kind of anecdotal. But what we decided to do is include the sudden deaths. There's a study about the sudden deaths that suggests that sudden athletic deaths on the field are very rare. And then we married my metadata with my team at Finance Technologies. And at the end of when we were writing the book, I put in a section on the who and the why, and we made the decision to kill that section because it's speculation on my part. I wasn't in the room, but what's undeniable is the numbers are the numbers. And I have a thesis, it's the vaccines. And if it's not the vaccines, why are the authorities not talking about it? And at the very least, there's a cover up of some kind going on. So that's kind of how I conclude the book. And it's a book that shows, unfortunately, sudden athletic deaths, teenagers dying in their sleep, celebrities dying suddenly. And it kind of brings the human face to the tragedy so that people understand that these aren't just numbers in a spreadsheet. These are humans that, lives have been tragically lost. And so so we wrote the book because I'm a different voice than a lot of the doctors. I come at it from a Wall Street trend analysis point of view. And we thought it was an important message to get out to folks to understand that a lot of the things that they've been told are not true. A lot of the news stories that are true have been suppressed. And I wanted to give people an information book that could help convince their loved ones. I wrote it for my loved ones so that I could convince other people's loved ones that don't agree with our viewpoint that maybe they should think about it.
Well, it's the impact of your time, along with Dr. Malhotra and Dr. Naomi Wolf dialing in from the US in Perth. The impact of that was basically immediate. You were on Sky News the very next morning while you were still in Perth, and they actually asked you about this book, and they actually allowed you to speak before finishing with the disclaimer that they kind of have to give in order to not get taken off air. You mentioned that a lot of this evidence is anecdotal, and it's incredible. You've got image after image, screenshot after screenshot of just so many news stories. And that's really what the bulk of this book is made up of. It is in a way, you could be derogatory and call it a picture book, but it's every single one of these pictures. You're absolutely right. It tells a really compelling story. But let's zoom out from the anecdotes for a moment. What was the bigger picture besides these stories of sudden deaths? You saw in the data some very worrying things, and you dove into other sources of data, insurance data and actuaries and so forth. Tell us a bit about what the data tells you in the big picture.
So at Finance Technologies, we calculated our own excess deaths, but let's put those aside. We have a website, financetechnologies.com, spelled PH, with all the evidence. But I think what I like to do is talk about other people's databases. And the Society of Actuaries has a database that produces excess claims. And in 2021, in the group life policy arm of the insurance industry, it's a survey that covered 80% of the revenues in the US. They had 40% excess mortality in ages 25 through 64. And these are the healthiest amongst us, so much so they did a study in 2016 that suggested that these people normally die at 1/3 the rate of the general U.S. population. Well,
Right.
the general U.S. population had excess mortality of 32% in 2021. So 8-point difference, where the healthiest amongst us all of a sudden popped above, the general U.S. population. It's not supposed to happen because the very nature of these people that work at Fortune 500 companies, mid-sized companies, they're working, they're in the prime of their life, they have access to the best healthcare. Then we went to another database, again, not our own data, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which showed that the U.S. disability count rose from around 29 to 30 million. It was jumping back and forth between 29 and 30 million for the prior 4 to 5 years. It shot up to 33.2 million in 18 months, beginning in February of 2021. And what's interesting about what we discovered is that of the 3.2 million that became disabled, 1.7 million of them were employed. Again, let me say that's more than half. So we came to the conclusion it was detrimental to your health in the book, and I've said this many times on podcasts, that it was detrimental to your health to be employed in 2021. And the only thing that I can come up with that's changed in 2021 was a mass vaccination program and job mandates to keep your job. So this data is devastating. And I said this to Senator Ron Johnson in December, and I said we have a national security issue in the U.S. Our work at Finance Technology has shown, that there's excess mortality in all the Western nations that really took the vaccine. And when I came to Perth, I showed that you guys have 16% excess mortality in 2022 versus minus 2% in 2020. And I said to everybody in Australia at that event, look, you don't have to agree with my thesis, but your health response is so bad that now people are dying in droves well after the pandemic. So the questions need to be asked. What's going on and why?
I think this is an excellent point and one that I want to reiterate for the sake of the censors that are no longer, no doubt, hanging over this video with their finger over the ban button. And that is, these are questions that need to be answered. The excess mortality cannot be ignored. And I want to reiterate the point that you just made because you make it so beautifully in this book. And I'm worried that people hearing you in this interview may have missed that slightly. The people who are employed, the people who got mandated, have seen a jump in excess deaths well in excess of the overall all population jump in excess deaths. Can you just confirm that's the case? Employed people have seen a bigger jump.
Absolutely. And the employed excess, the disability rate for employed went up 32% between February of 21 and November of 22. The general U.S. population's disability rate went up 8%. And even more alarming is the not in labor force. These are the people that could work and are willing to work, but either got fired or quit. Their disabilities only went up 4%, which is interesting because these are the people we suspect that either got fired for not taking the job or quit out of protest. And their health outcomes were the best.
Extraordinary numbers. And as you say in the book, and as you've said many times before, your thesis on the cause may be wrong. I'm not saying categorically that that's absolutely correct. I can't say that on YouTube. But this is a question that demands an answer. And right now it seems like the powers that be are not looking. I want to compliment you on the book's design. The cover is very, very eye-catching. But actually, the way I'll be using this book is with the dust jacket off. Because with the dust jacket off, this becomes an incredibly incognito book that I'm just going to have sitting on my coffee table in my lounge room. And people are going to come by and I'll go and make a cup of tea. And while they're trying to amuse themselves, they're going to pick up this book and see on the back, Dowd, don't know who that is, cause unknown. That sounds interesting. And I think this is going to become one of my most opened coffee table books at my house. And I'm very, very excited to see some of the conversations that this may actually spark. I'm very, very glad I got this in physical form. We're going to put the link both to Finance Technologies for those that want to dig into the data a little bit more, but also to find this book on Amazon. Unfortunately, in Australia, that's about the only place you're going to be able to get it. We'll put those in the description of this video. Ed Dowd, thank you so much for coming to Australia. Thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire, and I look forward to... Oh, no, hang on. No, you teased me on Twitter the other day. You put up a teasing post before we finish saying that you had something even more compelling than this. You were working on something that was even more of a bombshell. What can you tell us about that?
So we've obtained data from the UK. It's called the PIP data. It's Personal Independence Payment System for those who go on disability. So there is a lag to the data because you have to get a clearance. But what we found, it goes into medical causes, and we found some alarming signals that at the very least are going to knock the socks off people. And we want doctors to weigh in here because we don't pretend we're doctors. And we're going to present the data. We're going to ask If it's not the vaccines, what is it, and what's going on in the UK? We suspect if we had similar data in the US and Australia, we'd see similar things. One of the most alarming things I teased everybody with was blood disorders, hematology. That's a human system. Those claims have gone up 25 standard deviations above trend. Now, to understand what a 25 means, that's literally a black swan squared. 3 standard deviations happen 0.3% of the time. This is, look, this has to be addressed. And if it's not addressed, we're going to ask the health authorities why they're not addressing it, because it's going to bankrupt the pension system in the UK.
25 standard, that's not a typo. You didn't misspeak. 25 standard deviation. Wow.
For the category of blood disorders, and then we can drill down into specifics like what type of blood disorder. We can look at oncology, different cancers, different psychiatric issues. We're going to take a look at autism as well. You'll be surprised what we find there. So this is coming, and we're going to go on. We've already pre-selected some people that have crossover viewership in the U.S. to try to get this message out. And this is going to be a call to doctors. You don't have to buy my thesis, but you're going to have to buy the data is the data, and you're going to have to explain what's going on and why you want to ignore it.
Yeah. If you don't like Ed Dowd's explanation, come up with an alternative one that explains the data even better. Look, Ed Dowd, thank you so much for coming on. I will be watching your Twitter like a hawk, and as soon as those reports do start to come out, I'll be inviting you right back on here on the Aussie Wire. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'll come right back on, and I love you guys down in Australia. And again, I challenge you guys to shame the Yanks and get rid of the vaccine before we do. I think you have I actually believe you have a better shot of doing it than we do.
Well, fingers crossed, and only time will tell, but we're going to keep on keeping on.
All right, take care.
Thanks for watching the Aussie Wire News. You'll find links to all of our guests in the show notes. If you'd like to support the Aussie Wire, then please go to the Insiders link that is in this video's description and sign up for exclusive content, our Insiders community, giveaways, discounts, and so much more, all available strictly to our financial supporters, our Insiders. We release new episodes of the Aussie Wire News every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can watch them completely for free. You can also catch up on past episodes by heading to theaussiewire.com. And while you're there, make sure you join our email list. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.